Hi, everyone. This is Sacred Astrology. One of my names is Kay, and you can find me at circleofbreath.com. Today is the day of the full moon, so it's 17 hours after the full moon. Today, I wanted to talk about sacred astrology. What is sacred astrology? Well, it's the name I came up for with what I practice. The root word, the Latin derivative or original word that sacred was derived from, sacre. Now, I first heard this definition from Caroline Casey decades ago. Sacre means out of bounds, out of the boundary. So religions and divine institutions, institutions of divinity and spirit, use that word a lot. And they kind of co-opted it. So it has an association when you hear it of something either religious or divine or mystical. I don't know. That's what it has for me. And I'm guessing that's what it has for a lot of people. Anyway, that's not how I'm using it here. Although I am using it as out of the ordinary boundaries. So Caroline's story was that in ancient clan times or tribal times, when humanity was spread across the planet in pockets and small groups, tribes of people surviving in different areas all over the planet, there was a group and people survived together. They created a space for survival, whether it was nomadic space, temporary, or more or less long lasting. There was a boundary to that space. And if you went out of that boundary, you were on your own and facing the unknown. So without the material technological accoutrements that we have today to keep ourselves safe, living alone was a huge undertaking. Really, you could be devoured by wildlife or overcome by weather and climate and terrain, or you could wander into other tribes that were not as friendly as yours, or they were more fearful when they met someone who wasn't like them, and you could be in big trouble, or you could be resourceful and set up a life for yourself and have a cave and a shelter and a way to survive and become mystically connected to all and everything. So the range of possibility was huge, and the danger was huge also. Sacred, out of bounds. Now, today in astrology, we have the ecliptic, which is kind of like the plane that cuts through the planet on a horizontal level. Now, the Earth itself tilts, so but that plane tilts with it. We have on the next circle up, that's the Tropic of Cancer, and that's towards the North Pole. And then the next latitude down is the Tropic of Capricorn. That's more towards the South Pole. So in this fat slice of the Earth is how we see the planets out there. And most of them stay in their planes, and mostly they stay between the two tropics, the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, which is 23 degrees from the center. Now, sometimes they go beyond that, and that's when we call a planet out of bounds. The folklore, the astrological common held definition is that when a planet's out of bounds, anything can happen. From the most magnificent and sublime to the most terrifying and degrading. It's a light, it's a field of vibration that hits the earth. So when those vibrations hit the earth and they're coming from out of bounds, they cause unusual fluctuations. What we do with that is totally up to us. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about today. I call it sacred astrology because it's out of the bounds of the traditional training that I had. I studied astrology back in the 80s and the early 90s. I learned before there were computers, personal computers. I learned the logarithms. I learned all of the traditional meanings of houses and planets and aspects. My teacher was very fond of secondary progressions, so I learned an awful lot about secondary progressions. And she also was very fond of Dane Rudhyar. So back then I read a lot of Dane Rudhyar. And that was the kind of the integration of spirit and psychology with astrology. So I was out and about doing my readings in the 90s. And at that time, I was also a yoga teacher and a fitness teacher. And I was very involved with cellular consciousness. I did a lot of modern dance, and I was involved with the consciousness of my body. And at the same time, I'm doing astrology on the side, and it's great. But as I did my readings, and I'm thinking, there's something going on here in my being that wants to transmit something to this person, a richer, unspoken energy of the planets, and I don't know how to convey that. So I set off on a mystical quest to understand what this is. In the meantime, I got an old Mac, one of the first Macs, and I got the first IO program, and I slowed down on my readings. But what I would do is check in every week and see what happened the week before. And then remember what I was doing and remember how it felt in my body. So I got a huge hit of what these movements felt like in my body. And I was also at that time transitioning into a moving form of yoga where we move and keep the consciousness of meditation flowing even though we were moving and not sitting still. Now, Tai Chi is something like this, but this was not Tai Chi. It gave me another dimension of responsiveness and listening in my body. And from there, I met a real mystical teacher. And that was like a big bang. I'm telling you, I'm nothing like I was back then. I kind of look a little bit like older, but my whole life is completely different because I spent the next 20 years exploring a non-verbal, energetic realm of human potential, of human capacity, of gifts that we have inside that we don't even know we have. And finally, I just gave everything away and packed up and moved there because I wanted to immerse myself completely. The first teacher was a spiritual tradition from the Abrahamic traditions and the very Eastern Asian aspects. This other tradition was Himalayan and basically Oriental, and it was non-theistic, which means there was no hierarchy of sublime energies that came to a pinnacle God. It meant that humanity had radiance of different qualities they call them the forces. And the interaction of those qualities created who we are and still creates in every moment. They were remarkably similar without having a conceptual similarity. So all of this has nothing to do with astrology, and it does in the way that I do my readings. I see the planets as part of my body, basically. And the way I will explain that is that if I think about the water in my body's about 71 to 3% water, and the earth is about 71 to 3% water. My body has minerals. The earth has minerals. I breathe, I expand and contract. The earth breathes, it expands and contracts, and there's winds and tides. I have a fractal system of capillaries and nerves And if you look at the trees and all of the plants and all the plant life, it's a whole interaction of fractal components. I have heat and lack of heat, and I have electricity, and we have the sun, and we have light, and we have all of those things pulsing through the earth. So basically, I see myself as a small chunk of earth roaming the earth. And I enjoy that very much. I see Mercury as a part of my body, just like water is a part of my body. And what the information that's handed to us from the ancients is that Mercury is communicative. So Mercury may have something to do with the formation of these fractal-like branches and the nerve cells that conduct electricity and transfer information through and through and through and through. The sun, I mean, there's so many different definitions for the sun out there. Some people say it's the soul, some people say it's the head, some people say it's the face. And what they mean is that it's something truly essential to our humanity. So I call the sun my life force, basically, the driving life force. And the moon, some people call it the heart, some people call it the soul, some people call it the femininity, some people call it the emotions. I see the moon as the day-to-day fluctuation in my being that reflects a smaller cycle that is the larger cycle. So it is kind of emotive. And it is very related to water because the water on the earth and in our bodies really responds to the moon, which creates movements in the body. And those movements become responses and sensations in the body. So I call the moon the reflective light in my being, and also the waves, the tides of my being. My personal cosmology changed when I set out onto this spiritual path. And this is what I bring to the traditional astrology reading. Many people bring years of research in data from the ancient texts, and many people bring psychological experience with the associations and the flavors of all of these movements. I saw in the 90s, I saw what was coming with Neptune, Pluto, Uranus, what they were going to be doing. And I thought, okay, I really need to do this. While I was in the throes of all of this spiritual work, I truly was acting from another dimension of my being. And the way it was spoken of in the spiritual groups were within the tradition that I was studying in. So you would learn the texts, you would learn the spiritual words, but I also didn't want to just parrot that back. So I've let everything settle in my system for 2 decades so that I can speak to ordinary people with these extraordinarily sacred spiritual concepts that live inside of us without a dogma, without a prescribed set of orientations. There are there are ways that we need to sense and be in within with ourselves in order to feel these sublime energies. But it's becoming more and more, I'm not going to say common, but it is. It's becoming more and more universal. It's coming forth. And it's really important at this time because the outer thrust of the rational force, which is one aspect of the mercurial body, the AI force, the algorithmic force, wants to impose itself onto our humanness. And our humanness at this time in many beings is being called to rise up and find its own strength to meet this force so that this force is not overpowering, so that we can use the algorithmic force to support our lives, but not to enslave us. This is very important to me. Okay, that's what sacred astrology is to me, to awaken the divine, the divinity. And Greg Braden describes divinity is that which is inside of us that allows us to transcend and become bigger than we think we are, than our limitations that are imposed upon us right now. It's time to wake up our divinity, and I use astrology, specifically sacred astrology, to do that. Okay, thank you. If you made it this far, that's great. You can find me at circleofbreath.com/sacred astrology. Bye.